Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was sent to Themyscira and trained by Wonder Woman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had become a fragile, muted thing. For 10-year-old Izuku Midoriya, the vibrant colors of his life had been leached away, leaving behind a grayscale landscape of crushing reality. The wind that whipped across the rooftop where All Might had left him was no longer a playful breeze. It was a cold, scouring force that seemed to mock the pathetic warmth of his tears. It scraped at the raw wound in his chest, a chasm carved out by 4 simple words: "You need to be realistic." He'd replayed the moment 1,000 times in the 10 minutes since the hero had vanished. The steam-wreathed silhouette, the gentle but firm hand on his shoulder, the voice that had once been the bedrock of his dreams, now the sledgehammer that had brought them to ruin. It's not bad to dream, my boy. But you have to be realistic. Realistic. The word echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. It was the same word the doctor had used, the one that had made his mother cry. Quirkless. A single, clinical term that had branded him an outlier, a relic in a world of wonders. For years he had fought against that brand, clinging to the incandescent image of All Might's smile. All Might saved everyone. All Might said anyone could be a hero. All Might was the exception to every rule, until he wasn't. Izuku's small hands, still clutching the straps of his yellow backpack, were numb. His notebook, the one All Might had signed, felt like a lead weight inside, a testament to his foolishness. Hero analysis for the future, number 13. What future? A future where he stood on the sidelines, another face in the crowd, watching real heroes do the work he could only ever dream of. His descent from the rooftop was a blur of concrete stairs and the distant, cheerful noise of the city he no longer felt a part of. Each step was heavy, as if gravity had chosen him, specifically, to punish. He emerged onto the street, and the world assaulted him. The garish colors of hero merchandise in a storefront window seemed to taunt him. The confident laughter of a passing businessman with a minor telekinesis quirk, effortlessly levitating his briefcase, felt like a personal insult. He walked without direction, his feet carrying him through familiar streets that now felt alien. His mumbling, usually a torrent of analysis and awe, had turned inward, a frantic, self-flagellating whisper. "Stupid Deku, so stupid, why would you even ask? Wasting his time, he's All Might, he has important things to do, and you're just quirkless." He didn't notice the shift in the atmosphere at first. The distant sirens were a constant melody in Musudafu, as common as birdsong. But then came a different sound, not the clean, concussive boom of a hero's power, but a discordant, tearing noise like fabric being ripped on a cosmic scale. It was accompanied by a low, guttural hum that made the fillings in his teeth ache. Izuku looked up from the pavement, his tear-blurred vision slowly focusing. An alleyway a block ahead of him had become a vortex of wrongness. The air itself seemed to shimmer and distort, like a heat haze on a winter's day. A jagged, unstable oval of light, the color of a television tuned to a dead channel, flickered in and out of existence against the brick wall. It spat out a shower of fine, white sand, followed by a rusty park bench that clattered loudly onto the asphalt. A villain. The thought was automatic, a product of years of obsessive study. His fear, a vast and personal ocean of despair, was momentarily pushed aside by a tide of ingrained habit. He saw the figure at the center of the chaos, a man in a grimy jumpsuit, his face a mask of panic. Wires snaked from a complex device strapped to his chest, and his hands were outstretched, palms glowing with the same staticky light as the portals he was creating. This wasn't a calculated attack, this was desperation. The man, Glitch, Izuku's mind supplied, a fitting name for the visual distortion he caused, was trying to escape, but his quirk was clearly out of his control. More portals blinked into being. A torrent of seawater gushed from one, soaking the street before the portal snapped shut. Another opened for a split second, offering a terrifying glimpse of a fiery landscape under a black sun. The villain grunted, stumbling back as a larger, more stable rift tore open beside him. "Stay back!" The villain screamed, his voice cracking with fear. I can't hold it." The few civilians who had been nearby were already running, their shouts swallowed by the strange hum. All except one. A little girl, no older than 6, stood frozen on the sidewalk, a half-eaten ice cream cone splattered at her feet. A bright red ribbon in her hair seemed like the only spot of solid color in a world dissolving into chaos. She was staring, mesmerized and terrified, at the shimmering portal. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew the protocol. Run. Find a hero. A real hero. That's what a realistic person would do. That's what a quirkless, useless Deku should do. His legs were shaking, not with the aftershocks of his ruined dream, but with a primal, instinctual fear. The air crackled with energy, and the large portal began to pulse, its gravitational pull tugging at loose debris on the street. It was sucking things in. The little girl, finally breaking from her trance, let out a terrified wail and took a step back, stumbling over the curb. She fell, landing hard on her bottom, right in the path of the portal's pull. The red ribbon was torn from her hair, vanishing into the static maw. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was an impulse, pure and absolute, rising from the very core of his being. It was the same stupid, hopeless instinct that had made him rush toward the sludge villain to save Kaken all those years ago in another timeline he would never know. His legs, which had felt so heavy with despair moments before, were suddenly light. My body, it just moved on its own. The memory of his own words, a desperate justification to all might, flashed through his mind as he sprinted. The world narrowed to a single point, the crying girl and the shimmering vortex behind her. The hum grew into a roar in his ears. The pull was stronger now, a physical thing, like a giant, invisible hand trying to drag him off his feet. He reached her in a breathless lunge, his small body a shield. He didn't have the strength to lift her, so he did the only thing he could. He shoved. Go! He screamed, his voice thin and reedy against the dimensional roar. He put all of his weight, all of his desperation, all of his shattered dreams into that one frantic push. The girl tumbled forward, out of the immediate danger zone, landing with a startled cry on the pavement. Izuku felt a brief, blinding flash of relief. It was the last good thing he would feel for a long, long time. His momentum carried him forward, directly into the portal's event horizon. The pull became an irresistible force. His feet left the ground. He saw the little girl's wide, shocked eyes. He saw the villain's horrified face. In the distance, for one last, heartbreaking second, he saw the familiar shape of his apartment building, a light on in the window where his mother was probably starting to worry. Mom! I'm sorry. Then, the world dissolved. Pain was the first sensation. A tearing, shredding agony, as if every molecule in his body was being pulled apart and put back together in the wrong order. He couldn't scream. The air, if it could be called that, was ripped from his lungs. His senses were a meaningless jumble. He saw colors that had no name, shifting geometric patterns that defied logic. Flashes of his life flickered past his non-existent eyes, distorted and nightmarish. His mother's smile, warped into a grotesque grimace. All Might's heroic debut, the video stuttering and glitching like a corrupted file. Kaken's explosive sneer, magnified and echoing into infinity. The doctor's impassive face, multiplying into 1,000 cold, clinical stares. Sound was a physical presence, a roaring, screaming, whispering cacophony that vibrated through his very essence. It was the sound of stars being born and dying in the same instant, the sound of a billion voices crying out at once, the sound of absolute, deafening silence. He felt himself stretched thin, like sponge sugar, then crushed into a single, infinitesimal point. His mind, the analytical engine that was his only true gift, fractured under the strain. There was no up or down, no before or after. There was only the endless, agonizing now. He was a piece of flotsam caught in a cosmic hurricane, a forgotten whisper in a storm of creation and destruction. Just as he felt the last vestiges of his consciousness begin to fray, to dissolve into the chaos, the storm broke. He was expelled, violently and without ceremony. One moment he was nowhere, and the next, he was tumbling through the air, his body screaming in protest. The transition was brutal. The roaring chaos was replaced by the shocking sound of a wave crashing, and then the sickening thud of his own body hitting something soft. Sand. For a moment, he just lay there, face down, his world a dizzying swirl of pain and confusion. The sand was impossibly white, impossibly soft. It was also wet, clinging to his cheek. He pushed himself up with trembling arms, a racking cough shaking his small frame as he expelled a lumpful of salty water. He was on a beach, but it was like no beach he had ever seen, not even in pictures. The sand stretched out in a perfect, immaculate crescent, meeting a sea of such a profound and vivid turquoise that it hurt his eyes. The sky above was a flawless, unbroken dome of azure, empty of clouds, plains, or any sign of civilization. A single, brilliant sun beat down with an intensity that felt ancient and pure. The air was clean, thick with the smell of salt and unknown flowers, and it carried a stillness, a silence so deep it felt sacred. He was alone. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of his pain. He scrambled to his feet, or tried to. A searing bolt of agony shot up his left leg, and he cried out, collapsing back into the sand. His ankle was twisted at a sickening angle, already beginning to swell. He looked down at himself. His uniform was torn, his skin a road map of deep scrapes and bruises. A gash on his forehead was bleeding freely, the warm, coppery-tasting blood dripping into his eye. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a pathetic croak. It was swallowed by the immense silence, the only answer the gentle, rhythmic shushing of the waves. "Is anyone there?" Tears began to stream down his face, mixing with the blood and sand. This wasn't Japan. This wasn't anywhere he knew. The portal, it hadn't just moved him across the city. It had thrown him, somewhere else. A different world, maybe? The thought was too immense, too terrifying for his 10-year-old mind to fully grasp. All he knew was that he was hurt, he was lost, and he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He tried to crawl, to drag himself towards the line of lush, green vegetation that bordered the beach, thinking there might be shelter there. But every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body. The world began to swim in and out of focus. The brilliant sun seemed to dim, the edges of his vision turning dark and fuzzy. "It's not fair," he thought, his consciousness fraying. "I just wanted to be a hero." He saw his mother's face again, this time gentle and worried. He saw All Might's signature in his notebook. He saw the little girl with the red ribbon, safe. A single, tiny spark of warmth flickered in the cold emptiness of his chest. He had saved her. He had done one heroic thing. It was his last coherent thought before the darkness finally claimed him, and he slumped forward, an insignificant, broken heap on an impossible shore. Consciousness returned not as a rush, but as a slow, creeping tide. It began with the faintest awareness of sound, a low, melodic murmur, like voices speaking a language made of wind chimes and honey. Then came the feeling of a cool, damp cloth being gently dabbed on his forehead, clearing away the crusted blood. The searing pain in his ankle had been reduced to a dull, throbbing ache. He forced his heavy eyelids to open, the impossibly bright light making him squint. His vision was blurry at first, a collection of tall, hazy shapes. As they slowly swam into focus, a gasp of pure, unadulterated terror lodged itself in his throat. He was surrounded. They were women. But they were unlike any women he had ever seen. They were tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and limbs corded with lean, powerful muscle. They were clad not in modern clothes, but in what looked like ancient armor of gleaming bronze and burnished leather. Spears with wicked-looking points were held in steady hands, their tips aimed directly at his heart. Bows were slung over their backs, quivers bristling with arrows. Their faces were stern, beautiful but hard, their eyes narrowed with a mixture of suspicion and cold curiosity. They radiated an aura of danger and discipline that made the pro-heroes he idolized seem like amateurs. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He tried to scramble back, but his injured body refused to obey. A pathetic whimper escaped his lips. He was a mouse cornered by a pride of lionesses. These weren't rescuers. They were captors. Or executioners. "Please," he whispered, the Japanese word meaningless in this strange place. "Don't hurt me." One of the women, her hair braided in a severe coronet, and a jagged scar tracing a line down her cheek, took a step forward, her spear tip lowering slightly. Her expression was the most hostile of them all. "A male," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The language was strange, ancient and lyrical, but the meaning was conveyed with perfect clarity through her tone. On our shores, the law is clear, Philippus. Another woman, leaner and with fire in her eyes, nodded sharply. He has defiled the sacred soil of Themyscira with his presence. Cast him back into the sea from whence he came. The sea. They were going to kill him. The terror intensified, a cold wave that threatened to drown him. Tears welled up again, blurring the terrifying figures. He was going to die here, alone, thousands of miles or worlds away from his mother, all because he had tried to do the right thing. It really wasn't fair. But then, a new voice cut through the tension. It was different from the others, still powerful, but infused with a warmth and clarity that was utterly captivating. Enough, Artemis. The armored women parted, creating a path for a figure who moved with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. She was the tallest of them all, with long, flowing hair as dark as a starless night sky. A golden tiara, emblazoned with a red star, rested on her brow. Her armor, while similar to the others, was more ornate, a breastplate of gold and red that seemed to glow with an inner light. But it was her face that held Izuku captive. It was a face of impossible beauty, but it was her eyes, the color of warm, rich earth, that were truly remarkable. They held none of the cold suspicion of her sisters. Instead, they were filled with a startling mixture of curiosity, concern, and a deep, profound compassion. She walked to the edge of the circle and knelt in the sand, bringing herself down to his level. The action was so unexpected it momentarily silenced the other warriors. This magnificent, goddess-like being was kneeling before a bleeding, crying child. He is no invader, she said, her gaze fixed on Izuku. Her voice was soothing, a balm on his frayed nerves. He is a boy. Wounded, and afraid. She reached out a hand, not to strike, but to gently push a stray, blood-matted lock of green hair from his forehead. Her touch was warm and incredibly gentle. Izuku flinched at first, but then found himself leaning into the contact, a primal part of him recognizing safety for the first time since he'd been torn from his world. We do not know how he came to be here, Philippus, the woman continued, her voice rising to address the scarred warrior. Our laws were forged to protect us from the arrogance and violence of man's world. They were not forged to condemn a lost child to death. The warrior named Philippus looked conflicted, her spear held less rigidly now. But Princess Diana, before she could finish, a new presence made itself known. A ripple of deference went through the assembled warriors. They straightened their backs, their expressions shifting from hostility to solemn respect as they parted once more. A new figure strode onto the beach. She was older than the others, her dark hair streaked with elegant silver at the temples. She wore not armor, but flowing white robes, and a golden circlet rested on her brow, signifying a station even higher than the woman called Diana. Her face was regal, etched with the wisdom and sorrow of ages, and as she came to a halt, her expression was a mask of stern, unreadable authority. It was the face of a queen. Her gaze swept past the assembled warriors, past the compassionate princess kneeling in the sand, and settled directly, and with an unnerving intensity, on Izuku. The weight of that stare was immense, heavier than any physical force he had ever felt. It was the gaze of a judge, a jury, and a law that had stood for 3,000 years. In her eyes he saw no pity, no curiosity, only the cold, unyielding assessment of an anomaly that had breached her perfect, isolated world. The queen of the Amazons had arrived, and Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who had only ever wanted to be a hero, knew that his fate now rested entirely in her hands. The silence that fell over the beach was absolute, broken only by the endless, unforgiving whisper of the waves. The journey from the shore was a disorienting haze of sensations. Izuku felt himself lifted from the sand by a pair of arms as strong as steel, yet surprisingly gentle. His head lolled against a bronze-clad shoulder, the metal cool against his feverish skin. He was being carried, and with every powerful stride the woman took, the rhythmic shushing of the waves receded, replaced by a symphony of new, alien sounds. The rustle of unseen leaves, the melodic trickle of water, the distant cry of a bird he couldn't name. He cracked his eyes open, his vision a swimming blur. He saw towering white columns entwined with flowering vines of impossible blues and purples. He saw wide, sun-drenched courtyards paved in marble that seemed to hum with a soft, inner light. Fountains shaped like mythical creatures spouted water that sparkled like liquid diamonds. Everything was pristine, ancient, and achingly beautiful, a stark contrast to the concrete and steel jungle of Muzidifu. It was a city born from a dream, and it terrified him to his very core. The women who populated this ethereal city were just as intimidating. They stopped their tasks, polishing shields, fletching arrows, sparring with a deadly grace in open-air gymnasiums, to stare as he was carried past. Their faces were a uniform mask of shock and hardened suspicion. He was an impurity in their perfect world, a stain on their white marble, and he could feel the weight of their collective gaze like a physical pressure. He squeezed his eyes shut again, wishing he could disappear. He was finally brought into a large, airy chamber filled with the scent of herbs and something else, something clean and vital, like fresh rain after a thunderstorm. He was laid gently upon a soft slab of cool stone covered in fine linen. The imposing warrior who had carried him, the one with the fiery eyes called Artemis, retreated with a final, disdainful glare. For a moment, he was left with only the compassionate one, Princess Diana. She knelt beside him again, her presence a small island of calm in his ocean of fear. "You are safe now," she said, her voice a low murmur. And somehow, through the fog of a language he didn't know, he understood the intent. The compassion in her eyes was a universal tongue. Another woman approached, older, with kind, knowing eyes and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. She introduced herself in that same musical language, but her tone was that of a doctor, calm and reassuring. She examined his ankle with a touch so deft he barely felt it. She then applied a thick, green poultice that smelled of crushed leaves and damp earth. The moment it touched his skin, the sharp, throbbing pain that had been his constant companion vanished, replaced by a pleasant, cooling numbness. He gasped in surprise. No medication his mother had ever given him for scrapes and bruises had worked like that. The woman then cleaned the gash on his forehead with a clear liquid that didn't sting, bandaging it with a strip of linen that felt softer than silk. She gave Diana a nod, spoke a few quiet words, and departed, leaving Izuku alone with the princess. What is this place?" Izuku managed to whisper, the words raspy in his throat. Diana seemed to understand, her expression softening. She dipped a cloth in a basin of cool water and began to gently wipe the grime and dried salt from his face. "This is Themyscira," she replied, and as she spoke, a strange thing happened. The lyrical, foreign words shimmered in his mind, and for a split second, he heard them as clear Japanese. Themyscira. The name meant nothing to him, but it sounded ancient and powerful. He realized this woman, this princess, was somehow bridging the gap between their languages. It was a power unlike any quirk he had ever catalogued. It wasn't telepathy. It felt more like his mind was being gently guided to an understanding. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We do not know," Diana admitted, her brow furrowed with concern. "You appeared on our shores, a child cast out of a storm. But your arrival has caused a great deal of distress for my people." Her gaze was heavy with unspoken meaning. "My mother, the queen, must decide what is to be done with you." The words sent a fresh spike of fear through him, a chill that the herbal poultice couldn't touch. A queen. A decision. It all sounded so final. He was a piece of lost luggage, and they were deciding whether to claim him or discard him. Before he could spiral further into his panic, 2 guards appeared at the doorway. They were tall and impassive, their bronze armor gleaming. They gestured, and Diana rose to her feet, her expression becoming more serious. "It is time," she said, her voice low. She looked down at him, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of conflict in her eyes, a deep-seated worry. She offered him a hand. "Can you stand?" With the poultice working its magic, his ankle could bear his weight, though it felt strange and disconnected. He stood shakily, his torn, modern school uniform looking utterly pathetic and out of place beside her regal bearing. She kept a steadying hand on his shoulder as the guards led them from the healing chamber. They walked through vast, echoing halls, their footsteps the only sound. Izuku's mind, the one part of him that always worked, tried to catalogue what he saw, a desperate attempt to impose logic on the impossible. The architecture was Grecian, he recognized from a history book, but grander and more harmonious than any ruin he'd ever seen pictures of. There were no signs of decay, no dust, no imperfection. It was a living, breathing piece of ancient history. They emerged into the grandest space yet. It wasn't a room, but a colossal, open-air amphitheater carved from a single, continuous piece of white stone. Tiers of seats rose in a sweeping semicircle, and every seat was filled by a silent, watching Amazon. At the focal point, on a raised dais, sat a throne of polished driftwood and gold, and on that throne sat the queen he had seen on the beach. Hippolyta. He was guided to the center of the vast floor, directly before the throne. Diana stood beside him, her presence the only thing keeping his legs from collapsing. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket of judgment woven from the stares of 1,000 warrior women. He felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. Queen Hippolyta's gaze was as cold and unyielding as it had been on the shore. She looked down at him not as a mother looks at a child, but as a monarch looks at a problem. "The boy has been tended to," she declared, her voice ringing with an authority that needed no amplification in the perfect acoustics of the hall. "The question of his fate remains. Philippus, you are my general. You will speak first." The scarred warrior from the beach stepped forward. Her armor seemed to darken the air around her. She did not look at Izuku, but at her queen. "My queen," Philippus began, her voice a low, steady rumble of command. "For 3,000 years, our law has been absolute. Aphrodite's girdle protects our island, and our law protects our society. No man may set foot on Themyscira and live. This law was written in the blood and tears of our sisters after the betrayal of Heracles and his armies. It is the foundation of our peace, the bedrock of our sanctuary." Her gaze swept over the assembled Amazons. "To allow this male, this child, to remain is to create a crack in that bedrock. Today it is one lost boy. Tomorrow, will it be a fleet of warships, drawn by the weakness we have shown? He is a seed from man's world, a world of chaos, war, and arrogance. We do not know what poison he carries in his heart. The law is clear. He must be cast out." A murmur of agreement rippled through the tiers. The word law was spoken with a reverence that chilled Izuku to the bone. He didn't need to understand the specifics. He understood the verdict. Then Artemis, her fiery eyes blazing with conviction, stepped forward beside Philippus. "Cast out is too merciful," she spat, her voice sharp and cutting. "Philippus speaks of law. I speak of justice. The world of men took our freedom. It repaid our hospitality with chains and subjugation. It is a world that has only ever brought us pain. This boy is a part of that world. Look at him." She finally turned her burning gaze on Izuku, who flinched as if struck. "He is small now, and weak. But he will grow. And in the heart of every man, no matter how small, lies the potential for the same darkness that enslaved us. We are Amazons. We do not nurture vipers in our midst, hoping they will not bite. We cut off their heads. I say we give him a warrior's death and send his body back to the sea. Let Poseidon return him to his people as a warning." The violence of her words was a physical blow. Izuku's breath hitched, and his vision swam with tears. A warrior's death? He was 10. He just wanted his mom. The sheer, hateful intensity radiating from Artemis was more terrifying than any villain he had ever seen on the news. Before the rising tide of aggressive assent could swell further, Diana stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of Izuku. "And I say you are both wrong," she said, her voice ringing with a power that silenced the hall. It was not loud, but it possessed a clarity, a purity of conviction that cut through the anger. She turned her gaze from Artemis and Philippus to her mother on the throne. "Mother, Philippus speaks of a law designed to protect us from violent men, from armies and invaders. Look at him." She gestured back at Izuku, who was trembling behind her. "This is not Heracles. This is not a soldier. He is a child, lost and terrified. Our laws were created to preserve justice, not to abandon compassion. To kill a child in the name of safety is to become the very thing we fled from." Philippus bristled. "Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford, princess. The safety of Themyscira comes first. Is our peace so fragile that the presence of a single, helpless boy can shatter it?" Diana countered, her voice rising with passion. then it is not a peace worth having. Artemis speaks of the darkness in the hearts of men. I do not deny that darkness exists. But I was in man's world. I saw it firsthand. And I saw good there, too. I saw love, and sacrifice, and heroism. To condemn an entire gender for the sins of some is an injustice as great as any we ourselves have suffered. She took a step closer to the throne, her gaze pleading with her mother. When I found him on the shore, I felt the truth of him. The lasso of Hestia that I carry resonates with truth, and even without wielding it, I can feel the echoes of it in the world. As this boy was torn from his home, his last conscious thought was not of himself, it was of another. He saved someone, at the cost of his own safety. He threw himself into the storm to save another child. A collective gasp, soft but audible, went through the amphitheater. This was new information. The narrative shifted slightly. He wasn't just a passive piece of flotsam, he was an active agent of self-sacrifice. A heart that's selfless is not the heart of a viper, Diana finished, her voice softening. It is the heart of a hero. I ask you, my queen, my sisters, do we, the Amazons of Themyscira, punish heroism? Do we answer a selfless act with a death sentence? The hall was silent once more, but this was a different kind of silence. It was filled with conflict, with doubt. Diana's words had struck a chord, challenging their hardened beliefs with their own most cherished ideals, honor, justice, and heroism. Izuku, hiding behind Diana, understood more than he should have. He understood the accusation and the defense. He remembered the little girl, the feel of his hands pushing her to safety, the flash of relief. Diana knew. This incredible woman knew what he had done, and she was using it to save his life. A flicker of warmth bloomed in his chest, a fragile flower of hope in a desolate landscape. Queen Hippolyta listened to it all, her face an unreadable mask of stone. Her gaze moved from Diana, to Philippus, to Artemis, and then back to the small, trembling boy at the center of the storm. For a long moment, she said nothing. The fate of Izuku Midoriya hung suspended in that silence. He could see the conflict in the queen's eyes, her duty to the law, her love for her daughter, the ancient trauma of her people. The law is the law, Hippolyta said finally, her voice heavy with the weight of her decision. It has kept us safe for millennia. A single exception can become a torrent. Diana, your heart is full of compassion, and that is a credit to you. But a queen cannot rule with her heart alone. She seemed to be leaning towards Philippus's judgment. Izuku's own heart sank into the pit of his stomach. Diana's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. The boy cannot stay, Hippolyta declared. He represents a risk we cannot. She stopped. Her words were cut off by a sudden, unnatural stillness. The gentle breeze that had been whispering through the amphitheater died completely. The melodious sounds of the island, the birds, the fountains, the distant surf, vanished, plunging the world into an eerie, profound silence. Every Amazon, from the queen on her throne to the youngest warrior in the highest tier, froze. A figure was descending the stone steps from the upper tiers. It was a woman, her hair white as snow, her eyes a milky, clouded blue. She wore simple, gray robes and walked with a slow, shuffling gait, leaning heavily on a staff of gnarled olive wood. As she moved, the air around her seemed to shimmer, and a low hum resonated through the stone floor. The oracle, someone whispered, the word laced with awe and fear. The woman, Menelip the oracle, did not stop when she reached the floor. She continued her slow, deliberate walk until she stood directly in front of Izuku. She was ancient, her face a web of deep-set wrinkles, but her clouded eyes seemed to see something far beyond the physical world. She raised a trembling hand and pointed a long, bony finger at Izuku's chest. He flinched, but he did not feel a touch. He felt a sudden, piercing cold, as if her gaze were plunging through his skin and into his very soul. He felt exposed, his entire being laid bare, his quirklessness, his dreams, his fears, his one small act of bravery. Then, the oracle's body went rigid. Her back arched, and her head snapped back. The milky blue eyes rolled up into her head, showing only the whites. The hum intensified, and her voice, when it came, was not her own. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, male and female, young and old, speaking in perfect unison. It was the voice of ages, and it filled the amphitheater with a power that dwarfed even the queens. Silence! The voice boomed, a command that vibrated in their very bones. The threads of fate are rewoven. The more I watched this shore, the oracle's body trembled violently, her staff clattering to the marble floor. A son of man, born without the power of his kin, shall be washed upon our shores. Every eye was now fixed on Izuku, the living embodiment of the words being spoken. He was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from the woman before him. He is the unwritten page, the quiet heart in a world of thunder. Cast not the child out, for in him lies a path unforeseen. The oracle's voice softened, becoming more melodic, more sorrowful. Forged in Amazonian fire and tempered by the lasso of truth, he will become a champion. Not of the gods, who have champions aplenty, but for a world drowning in its own might. A world where power is a birthright, and strength is mistaken for virtue. The voice paused, and the wind began to stir again, swirling around the oracle and Izuku in a small, contained vortex. His heart shall be his shield. His will, his sword. He is not the end of our way, daughters of Themyscira. He is a new beginning. Do not fear the boy. Fear the world that would have discarded him. As the last word echoed and faded, the oracle collapsed, her body going limp. She would have fallen to the floor had Diana not surged forward to catch her. The hum ceased. The unnatural silence broke, and the sounds of the island rushed back in, seeming louder than before. The amphitheater was utterly still. No one spoke. No one moved. An edict from the queen was one thing. A direct prophecy from the oracle, a mouthpiece of the fates themselves, was another entirely. It was immutable. It was destiny. Artemis and Philippus stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and grudging awe. The certainty and anger had been washed away, replaced by a profound confusion. Their entire worldview, their most sacred law, had just been overturned by a divine decree centered on the small, green-haired boy in their midst. Queen Hippolyta slowly rose from her throne. The unreadable mask was gone, replaced by an expression of deep, solemn contemplation. She descended the steps of the dais, her white robes flowing behind her, until she stood before Izuku. She looked at Diana, holding the unconscious oracle, and then her gaze, finally, fell upon the boy. The coldness was gone. In its place was a heavy weight of responsibility, and something else, a flicker of wonder. The fates have spoken, she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying to every corner of the hall. The law is superseded. The debate is over. She knelt, mirroring her daughter's earlier action, bringing herself eye to eye with the terrified child who was now, apparently, their destiny. You will stay, son of man, Hippolyta declared, her voice regaining its regal authority. You will not be a prisoner, nor will you be an outcast. You will be raised as we are raised. You will learn what we learn. You will be trained in our ways, and you will live by our code of honor. She turned her head to Diana, who was now helping the groggy oracle to her feet. Diana, you first saw the child where others saw the man. You heard the heart where others heard the threat. The prophecy spoke of him being tempered by truth. You are the bearer of the lasso of Hestia. You shall be his guardian, his mentor, his teacher. You will be responsible for forging this champion the fates have foretold. Diana looked from her mother to Izuku, a look of profound, overwhelming responsibility dawning on her face. She nodded slowly. I will, mother. I accept. Finally, Hippolyta looked back at Izuku. Her expression was complex, a mixture of a queen's duty and a mother's reluctant concern. What is your name, child? Diana spoke the name for him. Izuku Midoriya. Hippolyta tested the foreign sounds on her tongue. Izuku. Your old life is gone. A new one begins today here. It will not be easy. You will be tested beyond your limits. But you will not be alone. Izuku stared into the eyes of the immortal queen, his mind reeling. A prophecy. A champion. Forged in fire. He didn't understand half of it. It sounded like something out of one of his pre-Quirk-era comic books. All he truly understood was the core message, which Diana quickly and gently translated for him as the queen spoke. He wasn't going to be cast into the sea. He wasn't going to be executed. He was safe. The overwhelming relief was so powerful it buckled his knees. The tears he had been holding back for so long finally came, not in silent streams, but in great, shuddering sobs. It was the sound of a terrified, lonely 10-year-old boy who had lost his home, his mother, and his dreams, and had just been handed a lifeline in a world of impossible giants. He didn't know what a champion was. He didn't care about prophecies or the fates. He just nodded his head frantically, the tears and snot running down his face as he looked from the queen to the beautiful princess who had saved him. Okay, he choked out in a tiny, watery voice. Okay, he was grateful just to be alive. And in the heart of the Amazon capital, surrounded by 1,000 immortal warriors, the quirkless boy who could never be a hero took his first, tearful step on the path to becoming something else entirely. 1 year, 365 sunrises, each one painting the immaculate marble of Themyscira in hues of rose and gold. 365 sunsets, each one sinking into the turquoise sea, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. For the Amazons, it was but a breath in their long, unchanging lives. For 11-year-old Izuku Midoriya, it was an eternity. An eternity of pain, of sweat, of failure, and of a strange, burgeoning hope that refused to be extinguished. The Themysciran sun was a merciless god. It beat down on the hard-packed earth of the primary training ground, the gymnasium, baking the dust so that it rose in fine, gritty clouds with every impact. And today, like most days, Izuku was the one making the impacts. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs in a pained gasp. The world was a spinning kaleidoscope of azure sky, white columns, and the stern, focused face of his sparring partner, a 12-year-old Amazon named Lyra. She stood over him, not with malice, but with the cool, appraising look of a master craftswoman examining a flawed piece of work. Her stance was perfect, a low, balanced crouch, her hands held loosely, ready to strike or defend. "Your weight was on your heels, Izuku," she stated, her voice clear and carrying. "You overextended with your lunge. It left your entire right side open. A child could have countered it." Izuku coughed, spitting a mixture of dust and saliva onto the ground. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His ribs ached where she'd landed a solid, open-palmed strike. His shins were a tapestry of purple and blue bruises from failed kicks and clumsy blocks. Lyra was a year older and already half a head taller, with a lean, dense muscle that seemed to be an Amazonian birthright. Sparring with her was like trying to wrestle a statue that could punch back. "Again," he rasped, pushing himself up on trembling arms. His training tunic, a simple linen garment, was soaked with sweat and streaked with dirt. Lyra's eyebrow arched slightly. "You have been on the ground 7 times. Perhaps you should rest." The morning run was more taxing than usual. The morning run? Izuku's legs burned at the memory. It had not been a simple jog. It had been a 5-mile ascent up the treacherous goat paths of Mount Eryx, the island's highest peak, followed by a descent down the far side, a steep, scree-covered slope that tested balance and courage. All of this while carrying a 20-pound stone, a light weight assigned to him as a concession. The youngest Amazons had carried 40. He'd finished last, his lungs feeling like they were full of broken glass, long after the others had already begun their post-run stretching. "No," Izuku said, finding his feet and forcing himself back into a clumsy approximation of a pancration stance. "The prophecy didn't say the champion gets to take breaks." A flicker of something, pity perhaps, or a grudging respect, passed through Lyra's eyes. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture, and settled back into her own flawless stance. "Very well. Come." Izuku took a deep breath, trying to silence the screaming complaints of his body. He focused, trying to apply the lessons. Observe. Analyze. Predict. He saw the way Lyra's left foot was angled slightly inward, the slight tension in her right shoulder. She was baiting him, inviting another clumsy lunge so she could pivot and throw him again. He knew it. His mind saw the correct sequence of moves, a feint to the left, a low sweep to unbalance her, an attempt to grapple while she was recovering. It was a perfect plan in his head, but his body was a clumsy, disobedient vessel. He feinted, but it was too slow, too obvious. Lyra didn't even flinch. He committed to the sweep, but his leg felt sluggish, heavy as lead. She simply lifted her foot, letting his leg pass harmlessly underneath, and in the same fluid motion, stomped down on the inside of his supporting ankle. His balance, already precarious, vanished completely. A firm, calculated shove to his chest was all it took to send him tumbling back to the unforgiving earth for the 8th time. This time, he didn't have the breath to gasp. He just lay there, staring up at the perfect, mocking blue of the sky, the laughter of a few older Amazons watching from the colonnades ringing in his ears. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was the easy, thoughtless amusement of the strong watching the weak struggle. To them, he was a curiosity, a living paradox, the subject of a grand prophecy who couldn't win a single sparring match. This was his life now. The crucible, as Diana called it. His days were a litany of structured failure. The brutal conditioning of the morning was just the prelude. After a short, functional midday meal, barley bread, goat cheese, figs, and water, the real training began. Afternoons were dedicated to the art of Amazonian warfare. Pancration was a daily humiliation. He was all bone and sinew, still growing into a body that felt alien and uncooperative. He possessed none of the innate, explosive strength of his peers. Every hold he attempted was broken with contemptuous ease. Every strike he threw was parried. He was a textbook of how not to fight, and his body was the canvas upon which his instructors demonstrated correct technique. Swordplay was a lesson in frustration. The Xiphos, the leaf-shaped short sword of the Amazons, felt like a lead pipe in his hand. He struggled with the balance, the footwork, the precise, deadly arcs of the blade. While the girls his age moved like deadly dancers, their blades a seamless extension of their will. Izuku's movements were jerky and labored. Philippus, the stern general who often oversaw blade practice, would watch him with a critical eye, her corrections sharp and efficient. "You are chopping wood, boy, not seeking a life. Your wrist is too stiff, your feet are tangled. You telegraph your every move. You would be dead 10 times over before you even raised your blade in a real fight." Archery was the least physically painful, but an exercise in mental fortitude. The Amazonian longbows were massive, crafted from yew and horn, with a draw weight that made Izuku's shoulders scream. He could barely pull the string to his cheek, let alone hold it steady. His arrows wobbled in the air, often missing the target but entirely to thud pathetically into the grass 50 feet short. It was here that Artemis, the fiery warrior from his first day, seemed to take a special, perverse interest in his failure. She would stalk behind the firing line, her own movements a paradigm of predatory grace, offering corrections that were more like accusations. "Your stance is weak," she would bark, kicking the back of his knee to force him lower. "You hold the bow like a child holds a doll. Is this the strength of the champion? Are you meant to defeat your enemies by boring them to death?" Today had been particularly bad. After his 5th arrow had sailed harmlessly over the target, Artemis had strode over, snatched the bow from his hands, and with an effortless pull, sent an arrow whistling through the air to strike the dead center of the target 100 yards away. "That is how an Amazon shoots," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain as she shoved the bow back into his chest. "We are not playing games here, son of man. The prophecy has made you our responsibility. Your weakness is our weakness. Your failure is our failure. Do you understand that? Every time you fall, every time you miss, you dishonor the faith the fates have placed in this island." She had leaned in close, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that was more terrifying than her shouts. "I do not believe in you. I believe in strength. I believe in trial by fire. This island will either forge you into a weapon, or it will melt you down into slag. There is no in-between. So I will push you. I will break you down to your very foundations, because only then will we see if there is anything worth rebuilding." She had left him there, trembling, his arms aching, his spirit feeling as bruised as his shins. Her words echoed the cruel taunts of Kakin, but they were worse. Bakugo's insults were born of arrogant superiority. Artemis's cruelty was born of a zealous, terrifying philosophy. In her own twisted way, she was trying to help him. She was trying to break him in order to save him. The thought was so horrifyingly logical that it made him feel sick. And yet, through it all, the pain, the humiliation, the constant, grinding reality of his own inadequacy. Izuku Midoriya endured. The spirit that had made him chase after heroes, that had made him scribble endlessly in his notebooks, that had made him rush to save a stranger from a portal, was not so easily extinguished. It had been beaten, bruised, and reshaped, but it was still there. It was the stubborn, irrational core of him that simply refused to give up. Every night, after his body had been pushed to its absolute limit, his mind would take over. He would retreat to his small, Spartan chamber in the acolyte's wing of the palace. The room was simple: a stone bed with a firm mattress, a basin for water, a wooden chest for his few tunics. But on a small, carved wooden desk lay his true sanctuary, his notebooks. He had no paper and ink at first. Diana had procured them for him after finding him scratching diagrams in the dirt with a stick. They were beautiful, handmade things, with vellum pages and leather covers, and they were his most prized possessions. Hero analysis for the future was a forgotten dream. This was analysis for survival. Under the soft glow of an oil lamp, the aching, clumsy boy would disappear, and the analyst would emerge. His hands, which had fumbled with a sword all day, moved with a surgeon's precision as he sketched. He didn't just write "I lost to Lyra." He drew her stance, using precise lines and angles to show her center of gravity. He made notes in the margins in his messy, evolving script, a mixture of Japanese kanji and the Greek alphabet Diana was teaching him. Lyra's feint, not a true attack, but a test of reaction. A micro shift in her hips precedes it. Watch the hips, not the hands. Philippus's disarm uses opponent's forward momentum. A rotation of the wrist, not brute force. Fulcrum point is the elbow. Artemis's archery stance. Body is a single, solid unit. Power comes from the back and shoulders, not the arms. Draw the bow by squeezing the shoulder blades together. He filled page after page with these observations. He diagrammed takedowns, analyzed footwork, and broke down every technique he was taught and every mistake he made. He drew maps of the island from his morning runs, noting terrain features, potential ambush points, sources of water. His mind, once a repository for hero trivia, was being reforged into a tactical supercomputer. It was his one, singular advantage in a world where he had no others. He couldn't be stronger, he couldn't be faster. But he could be smarter. He had to be. This nightly ritual was his act of defiance. It was his way of telling the world, of telling Artemis, that even if they broke his body during the day, he would spend the night meticulously piecing his mind back together, making it sharper and more resilient than before. But his training was not all fire and pain. If Artemis and the physical crucible were the forge, Princess Diana was the quenching water, tempering the steel so it wouldn't become brittle. Her lessons were different. They rarely took place in the gymnasium. They happened in the cool, silent halls of the great library, surrounded by scrolls that chronicled 3,000 years of history. They happened in a secluded grove where a waterfall cascaded into a crystal-clear pool. They happened on the high cliffs overlooking the sea at dusk, the sky a breathtaking canvas of color. Diana taught him not just how to fight, but why. And more importantly, when not to. A warrior fights because they must, Izuku, not because they can, she told him one afternoon, as they sat by the waterfall. The goal of a true hero is not victory. It is peace, and peace is rarely won with a sword. She taught him philosophy, introducing him to the Socratic method, forcing him to question his own assumptions. She taught him history, the glorious rise of the Amazons, the idyllic life on Themyscira, and the dark, painful story of their enslavement by Heracles and his subsequent betrayal. Hearing the full story, the sheer depth of the trauma inflicted upon her people, allowed Izuku to finally understand the source of Artemis's and Philippus's hostility. He didn't condone it, but he could finally comprehend the deep, collective wound he represented just by existing. She taught him diplomacy, the art of words, the importance of empathy. To defeat an enemy, she explained, her voice as gentle as the mist from the falls, you must first understand them. Understand their fears, their hopes, their motivations. Often, you will find that your true enemy is not the person standing before you, but the misunderstanding that separates you. These lessons were, in their own way, more challenging than any physical trial. They forced him to look beyond the simple calculus of winning and losing. They were building not a soldier, but a statesman. not a fighter but a protector. The most profound of Diana's lessons took place in a small, quiet sanctuary at the heart of the royal palace. In the center of the room, resting on a simple pedestal, was a golden lariat. It seemed to glow with a soft, warm light of its own, and the air around it felt heavy with truth. It was the lasso of Hestia. It is one of the most powerful artifacts the gods ever gifted us, Diana explained, her voice hushed with reverence. It can compel any being, mortal or god, to speak only the truth. It can shatter illusions and reveal the heart of all things. But its greatest power is not what it forces others to do, but what it forces you to do. She had him sit on the floor, a few feet from the pedestal. He was not to touch it. He wasn't ready for that. But he could be near it. The lasso does not just compel truth from the tongue, she said, her voice a soothing guide. Its aura compels truth in the soul. You cannot lie to yourself in its presence. I want you to close your eyes, breathe, and just be. Izuku did as he was told. He closed his eyes. The image of his eighth failure against Lyra still burned onto his eyelids. He tried to breathe, but his chest was tight with anxiety and frustration. Let the day's struggles go, Diana's voice prompted. They are done. Now look inside. Be honest. Why do you keep getting up, Izuku? When your body begs you to stay down, when your mind tells you it's hopeless, what is it that forces you to your feet? The question hung in the air. His first, instinctual answer, the one he always told himself, was the prophecy. He had to become the champion. But here, in the warm, unwavering glow of the lasso, that answer felt thin. Hollow. It was an excuse, not a reason. He searched deeper. To be like All Might? No. That dream felt like it belonged to another person, another lifetime. All Might was a symbol of power he didn't have, a standard he could never meet. Clinging to that dream here was pointless. So what was left? I don't want to fail, he whispered, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. What do you fear failing at? Diana asked gently. Everything, he admitted, the truth raw and painful. The training. The prophecy. I'm afraid of being useless. Again. The word came out choked with all the pain of his past life. The doctor's diagnosis, his mother's tears, Kaken's sneers. Useless, Deku. You are not useless, Izuku. Diana's voice was firm, cutting through his self-pity. You are learning. There is a difference. But your fear, it is a wall you have built around your heart. The lasso will not let you hide behind it. Look past the fear. Why do you want to succeed? What will happen if you do? He thought of Diana's unwavering belief in him. He thought of the queen, who had set aside a 3,000-year-old law for him. He even thought of Artemis, whose brutal methods were her own twisted form of investment in his future. They had all, in their own way, placed their faith in him. I want to be worthy, he said, the words clearer now, stronger. You all saved me. You gave me a home when I had none. You're teaching me, even though I'm weak. Even though I'm not one of you. I want to prove that your faith wasn't a mistake. He took a shaky breath, a profound realization dawning on him in the warm, honest light. I don't want to be a hero because it's cool, or because I want to be famous like All Might, he said, the truth finally solidifying in his mind. I want to be a hero, because you are heroes. You protect this place. You live by code. You fight for peace. I want to be strong enough to protect what I care about. And I care about Themyscira. I care about you. A single tear slid from under his eyelid, not of sadness, but of pure, unvarnished clarity. It was the truest thing he had ever said. He opened his eyes. Diana was smiling, a look of immense pride on her face. Now that, she said softly, is a foundation upon which we can build a champion. That night, back in his room, Izuku did not immediately open his notebook. He sat on the edge of his bed, replaying the day. The pain of the morning run. The humiliation of the sparring match. The sting of Artemis's words. And the profound peace of Diana's lesson. He was beginning to understand. Artemis's fire was meant to burn away his weakness, his fear, his hesitation. It was the crucible. Diana's wisdom was the water that tempered him, giving him purpose, clarity, and resilience. One was forging his body into a weapon. The other was forging his soul into a shield. He was caught between the hammer and the anvil. And for the first time, he realized that was exactly where a hero needed to be. He picked up his notebook and a fresh piece of charcoal. He didn't draw a diagram of a takedown. He didn't analyze a stance. At the top of a clean, new page, he wrote a single sentence, first in Japanese, then carefully translating it into the Greek letters he was learning. A hero protects what he loves. It wasn't the end of the pain. It wasn't the end of the failure. But it was the end of the despair. He had a reason now, a purpose forged in his own heart, in the honest glow of the lasso. And with that, he could face 1,000 more sunrises, 1,000 more failures, 1,000 more days in the crucible. Because he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, what he was being forged for. The sea breeze that swept across the gymnasium carried the scent of salt and blooming oleander. For years ago, that breeze would have been enough to make a small, scrawny boy shiver. Now, it was a welcome coolness on the sweat-slicked skin of a young man. 15-year-old Izuku Midoriya moved like a storm. His feet, bare against the hard-packed earth, were a blur of controlled motion. He pivoted on the ball of his left foot, his body a coiled spring of potential energy. The opponent before him was a whirlwind of bronze and leather, a spear blurring in a series of lightning-fast thrusts and slashes aimed at his head, his chest, his legs. But where the spear went, Izuku was not. He ducked, weaved, and parried, not with a weapon of his own, but with his bare hands. He slapped the spear's shaft aside with an open palm, the impact echoing with a sharp crack. He flowed under a wide, decapitating swing, his back arching just enough for the deadly point to pass inches from his throat. His opponent was Artemis. This was not a lesson. This was not a demonstration. This was the culmination of 4 years of relentless, brutal, and single-minded training. Artemis no longer saw him as a weakling to be broken, she saw him as a blade to be sharpened against her own whetstone. The disdain in her eyes had long ago been burned away, replaced by the fierce, focused glare of a true rival. "You are still too defensive, Izuku!" she roared, her voice a familiar battle cry. She spun the spear, its butt end whistling as it swung towards his temple. "A shield does not win a war! A shield is what keeps you alive long enough to find your moment!" Izuku shot back, his voice steady and calm. Instead of retreating, he exploded forward. He dropped low, the spear butt passing over his head, and drove his shoulder into her midsection. It was like hitting a marble wall. The impact barely budged her, but it wasn't meant to. It was a disruption. As she grunted in surprise, his hands were already at work. He hooked his right foot behind her ankle while his left hand shot up, not to strike her face, but to press firmly against her jawline, turning her head and disrupting her balance and vision. It was a classic Amazonian takedown, one he'd had performed on him hundreds of times. But he added his own flourish. A move born not of Amazonian tradition, but of pure, analytical genius. With his other hand, he didn't grapple her arm. He snaked his fingers around the spear shaft near her grip and twisted, using her own forward momentum and his precise leverage to wrench the weapon from her grasp. The spear clattered to the ground. Artemis, her balance shattered, stumbled back 2 steps. Izuku did not press the attack. He simply stood, breathing evenly, his stance perfectly balanced, watching her. There was a moment of stunned silence. A crowd of Amazons who had gathered to watch the daily humbling of the boy, a moniker that had stuck long after it ceased to be true, were utterly silent. Artemis stared at her empty hands, then at the spear lying in the dust between them, and then at Izuku. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the first time Izuku had ever seen her smile without a trace of malice or disdain. It was a smile of pure, predatory delight. "No!" she hissed, cracking her knuckles. "The real fight begins!" She lunged, abandoning the formal grace of spearwork for the brutal, close-quarters efficiency of pancration. The next 5 minutes were a symphony of violence. It was a blur of block strikes, grappling holds, and lightning-fast reversals. Izuku was still physically weaker. When she landed a clean blow, it felt like being hit by a battering ram. But he was faster, more agile, and immeasurably more clever. He didn't try to match her strength. He redirected it. When she threw a powerful right cross, he didn't block it. He caught her wrist, spun with the momentum, and used it to twist her into an armbar. She broke the hold with a surge of raw power, but he was already moving, transitioning into a chokehold. She slammed him against the ground to break it, but he anticipated the move, using the impact to kick his legs up and over her shoulders, attempting a triangle choke. It was a dizzying, breathtaking display. He was a mongoose, and she was a cobra. Strength against speed. Power against strategy. He was the living embodiment of his notebooks, his body finally able to execute the flawless plans his mind conceived. He had taken the rigid, powerful forms of Amazonian combat and infused them with a fluid, adaptive unpredictability that was entirely his own. The match ended when they were both locked in a stalemate on the ground, a tangle of limbs, each preventing the other from gaining a final, decisive advantage. They were both breathing heavily, muscles screaming, bodies bruised. Artemis lay pinned beneath him, yet her arm was locked around his neck, threatening to cut off his air. "A draw!" Philippus's voice cut through the air, sharp and authoritative. She stood over them, her arms crossed. Her face, usually a mask of stern neutrality, held a flicker of deep, profound respect. "Release!" They broke apart, rising to their feet in a shared motion of exhaustion. A ripple of applause, hesitant at first, then growing into a genuine roar, erupted from the watching Amazons. Izuku stood, head bowed, trying to catch his breath. Artemis walked over to him. He tensed, expecting a critique or a blow. Instead, she clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and steady. "You fight well, Izuku of Themyscira," she said, her voice low and rough, but devoid of its usual bite. She used his name, followed by the honorific she had always denied him. It was a greater victory than winning the match. "You fight like an Amazon." He looked up, shocked, and saw it in her eyes. Acceptance. Earned in sweat, bruises, and sheer, indomitable will. He had passed her crucible. He had not melted. The boy was gone. In his place stood a young man who wore his scars as comfortably as his skin. The scrawny, trembling child had been burned away in the forge of Themysciran training, leaving behind a core of tempered steel. He was not built like the Amazons. He lacked their sheer bulk and height. But his body was a masterpiece of functional anatomy. He was lean, with long, defined muscles that spoke of explosive speed and wiry strength. His hair was still an untamable mop of green, but his face had lost its childish roundness, replaced by the sharp angles of a young man who knew hardship. His eyes, however, were what had changed the most. The fear was gone. They were still kind, still startlingly green, but now they held a deep, quiet calm, the watchful intensity of a predator, and the profound empathy of a philosopher. His mastery of combat was only the beginning. He had not just learned the Amazonian way, he had absorbed it. He could track a wild boar through the densest part of the forest for 2 days without leaving a trace. He could fletch an arrow so perfectly it flew true in a crosswind. He could speak the ancient Amazonian language as fluently as his native Japanese, and his understanding of their history and philosophy was second only to Diana's. He had earned his place. The younger Amazons no longer saw him as an oddity, but as a sparring partner who would push them and a friend who would offer a quiet word of encouragement. The older generation, the veterans like Philippus, treated him with a professional respect reserved for a fellow warrior. He was still the only male, a permanent, undeniable outlier, but he was no longer an intruder. He was one of them. His journey led him, inevitably, to the heart of the island's industry, the Great Forge. It was a vast, cavernous space carved into the side of the island's dormant volcano. The air was hot and thick with the smell of coal smoke, hot metal, and quenching oil. The rhythmic, percussive clang of hammers on anvils was the island's heartbeat. Here, under the guidance of the master smith, Epion, Amazons forged their iconic armor and weapons. Izuku was drawn to the place. He found a strange peace in the creative violence of the forge. It mirrored his own transformation, the raw material heated, beaten, and shaped into something strong and useful. He began to spend his evenings there, not as a warrior seeking a weapon, but as an apprentice seeking knowledge. He did not ask to forge a sword. He started with the menial tasks. He worked the bellows, his lean muscles straining to pump life into the coal beds. He hauled water for the quenching troughs. He cleaned and organized tools. He watched, and he listened, his analytical mind absorbing the craft just as it had absorbed combat. He learned the language of the metal, how the color of the glowing steel told you its temperature, how the sound of the hammer strike told you its integrity. Epione, a broad-shouldered woman with arms as thick as small tree trunks and a face perpetually smudged with soot, was initially skeptical. She was a traditionalist, a woman who believed the forge was a sacred space. But Izuku's humility and genuine fascination won her over. He never complained. He never shirked the hard labor, and his questions were insightful, showing a deep, analytical understanding of the process. "You have a good eye, boy," she grunted one evening, as Izuku pointed out a near-invisible stress fracture in a sword she was tempering. "You see the details. The weaknesses. Everything has a weak point," Izuku replied quietly, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a sooty hand. "You just have to know how to look for it." Epione gave him a long, appraising look. "You are not just here to learn. You want to make something." Izuku nodded. "I don't have the natural armor of an Amazon," he said, referring to their incredible durability. "In a real fight against weapons, I'm vulnerable. I need protection. But not a full cuirass. It's too heavy. It would slow me down. My speed is my greatest advantage." He unrolled a piece of vellum on a workbench. On it were his own designs, sketched with the precision of an engineer. They were not for a sword or a shield, but for a set of vambraces to protect his forearms and greaves for his shins. They were sleek, minimalist, designed to deflect rather than absorb, with articulated joints for maximum flexibility. Epione studied the drawings, her expert eye tracing the lines. "Clever," she admitted. "Lightweight. Functional. You've designed them around your fighting style." She tapped the drawing. "But the metal? To be this thin and still hold against a blade, standard bronze will not do. It will need a blessing." "A blessing?" Izuku asked, his curiosity piqued. "Our finest works," Epione explained, her voice lowering with reverence, "are not forged by our hands alone. We petition the master craftsman himself, Lord Hephaestus." She led him to the very heart of the forge, to a massive, ancient anvil that seemed to hum with latent power. It was scarred and pitted from millennia of use, yet it felt more sacred than any altar. Epione instructed him to place his drawings upon it, alongside a tribute of the finest steel ingots they had. She then began a low, resonant chant, an ancient plea to the god of the forge. Izuku watched, fascinated and humbled. He had read about the gods of Olympus in the library, but to the Amazons, they were not myths. They were real, tangible forces, patrons and progenitors. As Epione chanted, the air in the forge grew thick and heavy. The fires in the furnaces burned hotter, their color shifting from orange-red to a brilliant, white-hot blue. The shadows in the cavern seemed to deepen, and for a fleeting moment, Izuku thought he saw a massive, bearded silhouette moving within the flames, its eyes like burning coals. A wave of intense heat washed over him, and a single, booming word echoed in his mind, a word that was not spoken but felt, worthy. Then, as quickly as it came, the presence was gone. The fires returned to their normal color. The ingot of steel resting on the anvil glowed with a soft, silvery light. Epione was breathing heavily, a look of awe on her face. "He has answered," she whispered. "He has blessed the metal." For the next week, Izuku and Epione worked tirelessly. The blessed metal behaved like nothing Izuku had ever seen. It was pliable and responsive under the hammer, yet it held an edge like diamond and possessed an impossible durability. They forged the vambraces and greaves according to his designs, quenching them not in water, but in a special mixture of olive oil and nectareous herbs. When they were finished, they were masterpieces. They were a deep, gunmetal gray, polished to a mirror shine, so light he barely felt their weight. He strapped them on. They fit like a second skin. Epione handed him a standard Amazonian sword. "Try it," she commanded. Izuku hesitated, then nodded. He held his arm out, and, with a deep breath, struck the vambrace with the full force of a two-handed swing. The sword connected with a high, ringing chime that vibrated through the forge. The blade, a masterwork of standard bronze, shattered into a dozen pieces. On the vambrace, There wasn't a single scratch, not even a smudge. Izuku stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. It was perfect. It was more than perfect. It was divine. Hephaestus has smiled upon you, son of man, Epion said, a rare, wide grin splitting her soot-stained face. Wear them well. His foundational training, the forging of his body and his gear, was complete. But the final piece of his soul still needed to be tempered. Diana knew this. The prophecy had been specific, tempered by the lasso of truth. Being near its aura was one thing. Holding it was another entirely. She brought him back to the quiet sanctuary. The golden lariat rested on its pedestal, its gentle glow seeming to welcome him. In the 4 years since he had last been here, Izuku had grown taller than Diana, but as he stood before the lasso, he felt like that small, scared boy all over again. The lasso does not merely compel truth, Diana said, her voice soft but serious. It reveals it. To wield it, one must be able to face the absolute, unvarnished truth of oneself. It can break minds that are not prepared for what they will find. I'm ready, Izuku said, his voice firm. He had faced his fears. He had found his purpose. We shall see, she said. Take it. He reached out a hand that was surprisingly steady. His fingers, callous from both the sword and the hammer, brushed against the smooth, warm surface of the lariat. The moment he closed his hand around it, the world fell away. It was not the chaotic, tearing agony of the portal. It was an implosion of the self. The quiet sanctuary vanished. Diana vanished. There was only a boundless, white void, and in the center of it, there was him. But it was not the self he knew. It was every version of him, every potential, every fear, every hope, all laid bare. He saw himself as the quirkless, 10-year-old boy, crying on a rooftop, his spirit shattered by All Might's realism. The shame and despair were as fresh and sharp as they had been that day. He felt the crushing weight of his own powerlessness. He saw a version of himself that had given in to the bitterness, a scowling, angry young man who resented the Amazons for their strength, who saw their training as a punishment, his eyes full of the same hatred he had once seen in Artemis. He saw a version of himself that had succeeded too well, a proud, arrogant warrior, his movements flawless but his eyes cold and empty, a champion without compassion. A weapon, and nothing more. And then, he saw his deepest, most secret fear. He saw himself back in Japan, wearing his Amazonian gear, facing a terrifying villain. And he failed. He saw his mother, older and sadder, caught in the crossfire. He saw Diana's disappointed face. He saw the world burning because he wasn't strong enough, because the quirkless boy could never truly be enough. The vision was so real, so visceral, that a scream of pure terror tore from his throat. This was the lasso's test. It was showing him every lie he told himself, every weakness he tried to hide, every dark potential that lurked in the corners of his soul. It was offering him a choice: succumb to the despair, or accept the truth and transcend it. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was not a physical hand, but a presence. Diana. She was not in the void with him, but she was connected to him through the lasso, a lifeline in the storm of his own soul. Face it, Izuku, her voice echoed in his mind, not as words, but as a feeling of unwavering support. Do not fight it. Do not deny it. Accept it. All of it. The boy you were. The man you fear you could become. They are a part of you. But they do not have to define you. Her guidance was the anchor he needed. He stopped fighting the visions. He let them wash over him, through him. He looked at the crying boy on the rooftop and felt not shame, but compassion. He looked at the bitter warrior and felt not hatred, but pity. He looked at the failed hero and felt not terror, but resolve. Yes, that weakness was a part of him. That potential for darkness was a part of him. That fear was a part of him. He could not erase them. But he did not have to obey them. He reached out in the void of his own mind and embraced the visions. He accepted the scared little boy. He accepted the potential for failure. He accepted it all, because he also knew the truth that lay beyond it. The truth he had found in this very room 4 years ago. I want to protect what I love. The void began to dissolve. A new vision bloomed in its place. It was not a fear or a memory. It was a feeling. A feeling of pure, selfless love for his mother. A feeling of deep, familial devotion to Diana, to Hippolyta, to all the Amazons who had taken him in. A feeling of fierce, protective loyalty to the island that had become his home. And then he confronted the ultimate truth, the bedrock of his new identity. The question the lasso was truly asking. Who are you? I am Izuku Midoriya, he answered, his voice ringing with absolute certainty in the silence of his soul. I am quirkless. I am the boy who was told he could not be a hero. I am the adopted son of Themyscira. I am the student of Diana, the rival of Artemis, the apprentice of Epion. I am all of these things. My past does not limit me. My fears do not control me. My strength comes not from a power I was born with, but from the love I have for those who gave me a second chance. I am not a weapon. I am a shield. The white void shattered like glass, and he was back in the sanctuary, on his knees, gasping for breath. The lasso of Hestia was coiled loosely in his hand, glowing with a soft, warm, and now, accepting light. He had not broken. He had been tempered. He looked up at Diana. Her face was pale, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. She had seen it all. Your training is complete, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She knelt and placed a hand on his cheek. The boy I found on the shore is gone. In his place stands a man. A true son of Themyscira. He rose to his feet, feeling whole. The warring pieces of his identity, the boy from Japan, the warrior of Themyscira, had finally fused into a single, cohesive being. He was forged. He was ready. He just didn't know what he was ready for. The piece was a fragile, beautiful thing. In the months following his final trial with the lasso, Izuku settled into a new rhythm of life on Themyscira. The crucible of his training had ended, replaced by the quiet confidence of a warrior who had earned his place. He was no longer the student, but a peer. He sparred with Artemis not as a test, but for the sheer joy of the challenge. He spent his afternoons in the great library with Diana, debating philosophy not as a pupil, but as an intellectual equal. He assisted Epion in the forge, his hands now skilled enough to craft weapons and armor that met her exacting standards. He had found a home. A purpose. He had a family of stern, powerful, occasionally terrifying, but fiercely loyal sisters and mothers. The memories of his old life, of Mizurufu, of his mother Inko, had not faded, but they had become encapsulated, like insects in amber. They were a part of his history, a bittersweet ache in a quiet corner of his heart, but they belonged to a world he never expected to see again. He was Izuku of Themyscira now. The past was a ghost, and the future was the endless, sun-drenched horizon of the Aegean Sea. But the fates are weavers of cruel and intricate tapestries. And the threads of Izuku's old life were not as severed as he believed. The first sign was a tremor. It was not a shaking of the earth, not one of Poseidon's infrequent rages. It was a tremor in reality itself. Izuku was high on the cliffs overlooking the sea, meditating as Diana had taught him, when he felt it. For a single, disorienting second, the world seemed to shimmer, the razor-sharp line of the horizon blurring as if seen through heated air. The air hummed with a discordant, staticky note, the same gut-wrenching frequency he dimly remembered from the alleyway, from the portal that had stolen him away. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind only a profound sense of unease, a wrongness that pricked at the edge of his senses. He was not the only one who felt it. In the days that followed, a subtle disquiet settled over the island. The waters of the fountain seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. The stars in the night sky would occasionally flicker, as if their ancient light was struggling to reach them. The Amazons, creatures of instinct and harmony, grew restless. Their sparring matches became more ferocious, their patrols along the shoreline more vigilant. They sensed a discord in their perfect world, an invading note in their timeless symphony. The source of their anxiety was soon given a terrifying voice. Izuku was summoned to the throne room by a grim-faced Philippus. The amphitheater was not filled with the entire populace this time, but with the island's leadership, Queen Hippolyta on her throne, Diana standing beside her, and a council of elders and generals arrayed before them. In the center of the room, Menelip, the oracle, was convulsing on a cushioned mat, attended by 2 priestesses. Her seizure was more violent than the one Izuku had witnessed 4 years prior. Her body thrashed against the floor, and a low, pained moan escaped her lips. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. "She has been in this state for an hour," Hippolyta said, her voice tight with concern. "The tremors are growing stronger in the ether. She is trying to see its source, but the vision is violent. Unclear." As if on cue, Meneleb's body went rigid. Her back arched, her clouded eyes flying open to stare at the ceiling with an unseeing gaze. The chorus of 1,000 voices erupted from her throat again, but this time it was not a grand pronouncement. It was a scream of agony, a jumble of fractured words and terrifying sounds. "Tearing. The seams are unraveling. A wound in the world. Bleeding poison between the walls." The voice was filled with static, glitching and skipping like a corrupted recording. "The man. The glitch man. He does not control the storm. He is the storm. Power unchecked. Chaos unbound. He rips holes. To everywhere. And nowhere." A wave of dizziness washed over Izuku. The glitch man? The villain from the alley. His mind, trained to analyze and connect, instantly made the leap. The tremors, the static hum, the oracle's vision, it was all connected to the man whose out-of-control quirk had brought him here. The oracle screamed, a sound of pure psychic pain. A city of glass and steel, drowning in its own light. Faces in the fire. Screaming. Suddenly, a new image flooded Izuku's mind. It wasn't his own memory, but a direct, raw feed from the oracle's vision. He saw a cityscape he recognized with a jolt of shock. The soaring, sail-shaped tower of the Musudafa Municipal Building. The familiar arch of the Dagoba Bridge. It was his home, but it was a vision from a nightmare. The sky above the city was fractured, filled with shimmering, unstable portals like wounds in the fabric of reality. A skyscraper flickered, its top half replaced for a split second with a terrifying jungle landscape filled with monstrous, screeching creatures. A street corner was drenched in a torrent of purple sand. Panic was rampant. Pro-heroes, figures he would have once idolized, were overwhelmed, their quirks useless against an enemy that wasn't a person, but a fundamental breakdown of physics. Then the vision narrowed, focusing with sickening intimacy. He saw a face. A woman with kind eyes and green hair, just like his. But her face was etched with lines of worry and sorrow he had never seen before. Her shoulders were slumped, her smile a fragile, watery thing. She was standing in the kitchen of his old apartment, placing a single, untouched plate of katsudon on a small memorial shrine. On the shrine was a photograph of a smiling, 10-year-old boy with a bright yellow backpack. Inko, Mom. The name was a silent scream in his soul. The carefully constructed walls around his past shattered into a million pieces. The ache in the corner of his heart erupted into a supernova of grief, guilt, and a fierce, desperate love. He saw her face, older, sadder, and it was a physical blow, more powerful than any strike Artemis had ever landed. She thought he was dead. For 4 years she had been mourning a son who was alive and well, living a new life in a paradise she could never imagine. The vision shifted again. He saw the villain, the glitch man, at the heart of the chaos. He was older, no longer panicked, but mad. A wild, ecstatic grin was plastered on his face as raw, untamed dimensional energy, visible as crackling, multicolored lightning, arced from his body. He wasn't just opening portals anymore. He was becoming one. The oracle let out one final, piercing shriek. The champion. The world drowns. His heart is the shield. His will the sword. The prophecy is not of the future. The prophecy is for now. With that, she went limp, collapsing into a true unconsciousness, the psychic backlash too great to bear. The priestesses rushed to her side, their faces pale with terror. The throne room was deathly silent, the oracle's last words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Every eye in the room turned to Izuku. He was on one knee, his hand pressed to his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The vision had felt as real as the marble beneath his feet. He could still smell the katsudon. He could still feel the phantom ache of his mother's sorrow. He was torn. Utterly, completely torn. A part of him, the Amazonian part, the part that had found peace and purpose, screamed in protest. Themyscira was his home now. These were his people. This island was his sanctuary, his entire world. The idea of leaving it, of plunging back into that chaotic, loud, painful world he had left behind, was terrifying. He didn't belong there anymore. He was a different person, forged by different gods and different women. But another part of him, the older part, the son of Inko Midoriya, was in agony. He saw her face, lost in her grief. He saw his city, his home, on the brink of annihilation. He saw the promise he had made to himself in the glow of the lasso, to protect what he loves. He loved Themyscira. But he still loved his mother. He still loved the idea of the innocent people he had always dreamed of protecting. How could he call himself a shield if he hid behind the safety of this island while his first home burned? The prophecy, Queen Hippolyta said, her voice cutting through his inner turmoil. She had risen from her throne, her face grim. It spoke of a champion for a world drowning in its own might. We thought it a distant future. A possibility. But we were wrong. It is his world. The world of his birth. Diana stepped forward, her face a mask of compassion and resolve. She came to Izuku's side and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was grounding, a familiar anchor in the storm of his emotions. Izuku, she said softly, her voice for him alone. I see the conflict in your heart. You have built a life here. You have found peace. No one would force you to leave. He looked up at her, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. But my mother, the city there. Diana, they're all going to die. Yes, she said, her expression pained but firm. An injustice is being committed on a scale we can scarcely imagine. And what is the duty of an Amazon when faced with injustice? He knew the answer. She had taught it to him herself, in the quiet grove by the waterfall. It was one of their most sacred tenets. To face it, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. Wherever it is found, it was not a choice. He knew that now. It had never been a choice. From the moment he had been washed upon these shores, his path had been leading to this single, inevitable point. The training, the pain, the forging, the tempering, it was all for this. To be a shield for a world that was about to be torn apart. He squared his shoulders, pushing himself to his feet. The boyish tremor was gone, replaced by the grim resolve of the man he had become. He faced Queen Hippolyta, his gaze steady. I will go, he said, his voice clear and strong, ringing with a certainty that surprised even himself. I have to. A heavy silence settled over the room. It was not a silence of judgment this time, but of solemn, profound gravity. The son they had raised, the anomaly they had accepted, was about to leave them, to face a danger they could not fully comprehend. Hippolyta nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a monarch's pride and a mother's sorrow. We knew this day might come. Though in my heart I prayed it would not. She descended from her dais. Then we must prepare you. The next few hours were a blur of purposeful activity. There was no grand ceremony, no pomp or circumstance. This was the quiet, efficient preparation of warriors sending one of their own into battle. Izuku was taken to his chambers. His simple linen tunics were set aside. A new set of garments was laid out for him, a tunic of deep, forest green made from a fabric that was as light as silk but as strong as leather, and simple, dark trousers designed for maximum mobility. Over these he strapped on his blessed gear. The Hephaestus forged vambraces and greaves felt cool and familiar against his skin, a tangible connection to the island he was about to leave. Philippus, the stern general, entered his room. She held in her hands a scabbard and a belt. The scabbard held a new xiphos. It was a perfect weapon, its leaf-shaped blade forged from the same blessed metal as his armor, its balance flawless. The sword is a tool of last resort, she said, her voice gruff as she buckled the belt around his waist. It is for ending threats to the innocent, not for seeking glory. Do not dishonor it. There was no warmth in her tone, but in her eyes, for the first time, he saw something akin to a teacher's pride. Next came Epion. The master smith carried a round, bronze object that unfolded with a series of quiet, satisfying clicks into a shield. It was a hoplite's shield, but smaller, lighter, and collapsible for ease of carry. It will not withstand a god's blow, she grunted, pressing it into his hand. But it will turn aside the blades of men. A shield is an honorable weapon, boy. It saves your life so that you might save others. Remember that. He was armed. He was armored. But the final farewells were the ones that threatened to break the warrior's composure he was so desperately trying to maintain. He found Artemis on the cliffs overlooking the sea, the same spot where he had first felt the tremor. She was staring out at the horizon, her back to him. "You are leaving," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. She was silent for a long moment, the wind whipping her fiery hair around her face. "The world of men is a cesspool of weakness and deceit," she said, her voice low. "They will not understand you. Your strength is not a gift you were born with, like their quirks. It is a strength you earned through pain. They will fear it. They will resent you for it." "Probably," Izuku agreed quietly. She finally turned to face him. Her expression was fierce, intense, her eyes burning with a strange light. "Then make them fear it," she said, her voice a low growl. "Show them the meaning of Amazonian strength. When you fight, fight with all the fire of this island. Let every blow you strike be a testament to our way. Let your victory be so absolute that they will speak of it for 1,000 years. She stepped forward and gripped his shoulder, her fingers digging into his flesh like talons. "Do not fail, Izuku. Do not die a pointless death in that wretched world. You carry the honor of Themyscira with you now. Do not shame us." Then, in a gesture that shocked him to his core, she pulled him into a brief, bone-crushingly hard hug. It was as awkward and unpracticed as it was sincere. Before he could react, she pushed him away, gave him a single, sharp nod, and strode away without looking back. His meeting with Queen Hippolyta took place in the throne room, which was now empty and silent. She stood not as a queen before a subject, but as a mother figure before a departing son. "For years ago," she began, her voice soft with memory, "I saw a lost, crying boy on my shore, and my first instinct was to uphold a law born of fear. My daughter taught me to see past the law to the person. You have taught me that some risks are worth taking." She reached out and cupped his cheek, her hand surprisingly gentle. "You are not of my blood, Izuku Midoriya. You are not of my people. But you are a son of this island. You have a compassionate heart, a strategic mind, and the will of an Amazon. The world you are returning to is not ready for you." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I almost pity it." She then did something that no Amazon had done for a male in 3,000 years. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. It was a blessing, a farewell, and an embrace all in one. "Go with the grace of the gods, my son. Make us proud." Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes as he bowed deeply, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His final farewell was with Diana. She was waiting for him at the island's hidden harbor, where a single, elegant skiff was moored. The air here felt different, humming with an ancient, powerful magic. The oracle's vision was chaotic, but it gave us a focal point, Diana explained, her hand resting on the boat's tiller. "The source of the disturbance. Mizudafu, Japan. We can use the island's magic to open a stable gateway, a path through the storm, directly to that point." She turned to him, her beautiful face filled with a deep, sorrowful pride. "I wish I could go with you. My heart screams to fight by your side. But this is your path to walk. The prophecy was clear. This is your trial." "I know," he said, his voice thick. "I don't know how to thank you, Diana. For everything. For saving me. For teaching me. For believing in me." "You can thank me by living," she said, her voice fierce. "Thank me by being the hero I know you are. The world you are entering is obsessed with power, with flashy abilities they call quirks. They have forgotten what true strength is. Show them. Show them that strength is not the power you wield, but the choices you make with it. Show them that compassion is not a weakness, but the ultimate shield. Show them that a single, determined heart can be more powerful than any quirk." She pulled him into a deep, loving embrace, holding him tightly. "We will always be watching over you, Izuku. Themyscira will always be your home. You need only look to your heart to find your way back to us." She pulled back, her hands on his shoulders, and looked him in the eyes. "You have your armor. You have your weapons. But do not forget the most important things you were taught. Observe. Analyze. Protect." He nodded, committing her words, her face, her every lesson to memory. He pulled a small, smooth, white stone from a pouch on his belt, a stone he had picked up from the shore on his first day, and pressed it into her hand. So you don't forget me. She closed her hand around it, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. Never. She gestured to the skiff. It is time. Izuku took one last look at the island paradise that had been his crucible and his sanctuary. He saw the white towers gleaming in the sun, felt the clean, pure air on his face, heard the distant cry of the gulls. He was leaving home to go home. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the skiff. Diana began to chant, her voice weaving a complex spell. The water around the boat began to glow, the air ahead of them shimmering and twisting. It was not the violent, chaotic rip of the villain's quirk. This was a controlled, deliberate parting of the veil between worlds. An archway of shimmering, golden light formed on the water, and through it, he could see not the open sea, but the blurry, distorted image of a dark, grimy alleyway. The sounds and smells of a modern city, sirens, car horns, greasy food, pollution, assaulted his senses. Be brave, my champion, Diana whispered, her voice filled with love. Be true, he nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword. He turned his back on paradise, and faced the chaotic world of his birth. The skiff glided forward, passing through the golden archway, and with a final, disorienting shimmer, Themyscira was gone. Izuku Midoriya was home. And he had a world to save.